series called ExpertConnexions. I'm Julie Holton, the founder and principal strategist of mConnexions marketing agency. I launched this special series last Sunday because at mConnexions, we work with a variety of clients and individuals, all of us are experiencing some challenges and changes due to coronavirus. So we launched this special series so we could reach out and help in the best way we know how by connecting you to experts who can help. We are so glad you are joining us. We've had thousands of people tuning in since the series started on Sunday. This is definitely a time when we need to gather information from sources that we can trust. And so our next guest today is a partner, a trusted partner from mConnexions. John Mashni is a business attorney at Foster Swift and a member of the firm's coronavirus task force. Today, we're going to discuss some of the legal considerations businesses face as a result of the coronavirus. John, thanks so much for taking time to join me this morning.
Good to be here from my basement bunker, apparently.
I know, we were just saying we're all in the same boat. Some of us in living rooms, some people locked away in bedrooms, anywhere that we can connect.
Yeah. Good to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I know you've been really busy, especially with this new, who knew a couple of weeks ago that we'd have a coronavirus task force? So I want to start by asking you, what do you think are some important considerations business owners and managers need to keep in mind as they're facing this pandemic?
Well, I think, obviously a lot of people are in a situation where they don't have very much information and they're having to make very difficult decisions, without really knowing what's going to happen. I think the first thing we've talked about as a group and we've talked about with clients and even internally is, are we communicating? Are we finding good sources of information? Not just good, but the right sources, right? A lot of information is out there. You can't always rely on everything that you read, or you might read something, but not fully understand what's happening. So the first thing is have good sources of information. The second one is, are you communicating, right? Are you communicating with your internal organization, the people in your organization, right? Sometimes that's the place where you sometimes forget about, hey, we need to figure out, is everyone okay here? It's even if they're not sick with this virus, it's stressful. There's anxiety. People are really worried. So what can we do to alleviate some of that? And I think that's a really big thing that everyone needs to be thinking about, at all times. And then communicating outside with clients and customers and other important people to the organization. It's really important to have a strategy. And even when, I know this is a large part of what you do, right? It's important to have the right channels, right? A lot of times, if you think about the things that you do with helping people build social media followings and email lists and how do you communicate, right now, this is the perfect example of why you need to pay attention to those things, even when there isn't this kind of emergency type of situation.
Absolutely. We've been talking with a lot of businesses who had been thinking about getting an email platform to use and hadn't yet started using something. But great example, like you said, John, of needing to reach the masses all at once with some way to communicate that. And so email, and we're seeing email open rates in some cases as high as 80%, which, as you know, is unheard of. Normally that's around 10%, 15%. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm also glad you mentioned, John, talking personally with employees and that the internal communications, because that's something I know that our mConnexions team has been doing, is holding those internal meetings so that we can all check in on each other, make sure we're doing okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's really important, the internal communications for businesses as well. So there's no doubt there are a lot of legal issues to touch on. So can you talk about what some of those legal issues that businesses are facing with coronavirus?
So, yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to the legal side of things, there's a lot to work through. And I think every single individual or organization is probably going to have a different set of circumstances. But I'll just touch on the things I think we've noticed the most. One is contracts. People are worried about, hey, are my contracts enforceable? Do I have to fulfill some of these obligations? Do people have to fulfill their obligations to us? Those are big issues. A lot of people are worried about, hey, can I pay or am I going to get paid? Those types of things. That's a really big really big question that we're getting. There's also lots of employment questions, right? So, hey, what do I do? I can't afford these employees, or I have to keep them working, or can I even stay open, right? And then there's also the compliance piece. Hey, there's been a lot of issues with the governor putting out executive orders limiting what can be open, what can't be open, and how do you comply with all of these various emergency orders and then the regular law. And then, as you've seen, the federal Congress, right? They've signed into law this big tax package. They're going to distribute money. There's also the IRS is coming in and saying, hey, they're going to give some relief to taxpayers. So how do you comply with all of these various new laws that are being passed, new regulations that are being, or new kind of guidance that's being provided? So I think as a kind of general picture, I think it comes down to, right, how do you stay in business, right? How do you make sure that your operations continue and that you don't go out of business? Number two, what obligations do you have to follow in terms of, people who have obligations to us, and what obligations do we have to other people? And then three, how do you comply with all these new rules that are popping up?
It's a lot. It's a lot to
yes,
talk about. I can see why you're so busy. I want to talk too about, we have so many people working from home, and a lot of businesses have scrambled to try to make that a reality for their employees to be able to work, dial in remotely. And so I imagine that with this, I know mConnexions is a virtual agency, so this is something that we're somewhat familiar with. But as you have people working remotely, there are more potential security risks. So talking about, and even for some businesses, I would imagine some data privacy issues. So what are you seeing in regards to that?
So I think this is a great topic, and something I deal with quite a bit. And to me, it's great. And I think I love the trend of being, having people being able to work remotely, but this is kind of thrusting that into, the spotlight. And really, I think a lot of people weren't. Some people were very prepared, like yourself, where you have a remote team and that's all you do. Other businesses are really trying to rush into, hey, how do we have everybody work remotely? Because there might be some rule that's passed or some emergency order that says we can't even be open at this point in time. So my advice on when it comes to those things is you certainly have to look at the technology and make sure that you have the right IT vendor or internal IT staff. And they're probably some of the busiest people right now working and trying to figure out, hey, how do we keep everybody working so we can have that business continuity that we need? Here's some things to think about, though, as you're trying to make sure everyone can work remotely. As soon as we kind of change things quickly, there's opportunities, right? But there's also dangers. And some of those dangers, we look at in terms of cybersecurity. Data privacy. What does this mean, right? Well, there's a slew of laws out there that govern how your information can be used. And when you take information from your customers, from your clients, the information that you gather as an organization, what happens if that information essentially falls into the wrong hands, or someone breaks into your kind of systems from an IT perspective and it gets unauthorized access? I think this is where you still have to pay very close attention to cybersecurity, right? Are you giving the appropriate level of access to people? Is there anyone who understands? Are you training people so that they can use that technology, right? Because certainly, I'm sure before the coronavirus, there were many so-called bad guys who were out there trying to steal information. This might be the perfect time or the perfect storm where all the bad guys can be thinking, hey, more and more people are going online. Let's just push even harder in terms of phishing emails, in terms of business compromises, in terms of ransomware, right? People are already stressed. There's a high level of anxiety. And what we know about many cyber attacks is they often occur when these types of, when there's some distraction to the specific person, they're not paying as close of attention to an email, or they're not paying as close of attention to how they're going about their, using their, IT equipment, whether it's a computer, cell phone, those kinds of things. So I think you can't really neglect making sure that you're following proper protocol. Now, I know that that's probably the last thing on many people's minds, right? Like, hey, are we surviving? But when it comes to cybersecurity, the main thing I would say to people is pay attention to how your systems are operating. If something is maybe not making sense, talk to your IT department or some IT vendor and have them help you learn what's going on. When we look at someone that what we call a cybersecurity incident or a breach, that's when there's a third party that has access to your information and it's not authorized. In those cases, there are legal obligations that you have to follow. And it sometimes can result in, hey, some of our information is leaked out. Sometimes it can result in ransomware being put on your systems, like an employee's computer or on a server, something potentially even worse than that. That could shut down your whole business immediately, right? And if you don't even have a physical location that's open and now everyone's working remotely, the dangers are even higher, right? It's not necessarily the virus that's taking out your business. It's kind of these, downstream effects of the virus. The biggest thing I would say there is if you do have some type of business compromise with cybersecurity or privacy, make sure you reach out to a lawyer first, probably. There's reasons to do that. Make sure you can attach privilege to any type of communications. And then make sure you immediately talk to your IT vendor about what's going on and try to figure this out. So there's very, obviously every situation is going to be different, but those are kind of two first steps to make sure you know what's going on. Hopefully that helps. I know this is kind of a broad topic, but I think, the thing I would say is don't forget about cybersecurity now that we're trying to get everyone working at home as fast as possible.
And John, I know cybersecurity is one of your specialty areas. So you have a lot of information available on your website, fosterswift.com. Yep. So yeah. I think it'd be a great resource for people, especially businesses now, to take a look at those resources, it's better to arm yourself with information and kind of put some of those security plans in place that you likely didn't have in place before because it wasn't as big of an issue, or maybe now you're having different technology issues. And John, I know too, one thing that you've said to our team, or to me as we've been talking, is for everyone who's watching, even if you're not a business owner or in a management position, to be able to control these things, the potential, like the biggest threat potential when it comes to cybersecurity is the human users. So it's regular people like me, regular employees that are working for an organization. You just click on one wrong email, or you think your boss is emailing and it's not your boss, those phishing scams that are out there. So it's really the regular people, so to speak, that need to be aware of these dangers, because we're the stopgate.
Yeah, and let me add to that a little bit. I think you're exactly right. It's regular people. It's also people that are very high up in an organization, owners, right? People who are, C-level executives, right? They usually have access to very valuable information, right? People who are in HR, employment, people who deal with employment issues, they have access to very valuable information. People that have lists with W-2s, for example, or lists of social security numbers with names and addresses and birthdays, all sorts of personal financial information. If you look at hey, who's actually paying the people who work at the company, right? Those are really targets for people. If you look at accountants, lawyers, people who work in HR, specifically HR firms, they have a lot of personal information and they're targets. So now you say, okay, those people are targets, and when do these attacks typically happen? Well, let me give you some examples. Typically Friday afternoons, like today's Friday, right? So 3 or 4 hours when people are kind of winding down, and I think we were saying earlier, it's good that it's Friday, right? We need a break. Well, there's that natural kind of relaxation, but that's typically when a lot of these attacks are started and when they occur. Now, if you add to it, they also occur right when people are about to go on vacation because people are mentally kind of checking out. So now you add the anxiety that just everybody has, just because it's hard to understand what next week is going to look like, let alone this afternoon. So it's a really dangerous time, I think, for people, especially if they figure out, okay, I'm going to be okay, or I have food, for a foreseeable time, and now I can just start doing some emails and start paying attention to work. But they're not being fully engaged in what they're doing. They're not fully paying attention. Or maybe they get an email from someone who's a supervisor or a boss asking for something that maybe is a little bit unusual, like, hey, can you send me that W-2 report, or can you send me, hey, we got a very typical example would be a wire transfer. Hey, we need someone to wire money, right? And we just need you to send it to a different bank this time, where actually
right now with everything going on, it might sound like, well, normally they don't ask for it this way, but it's not business as normal, right? So
exactly. Yeah. I think that, and I think this, I'm really glad that we're talking about this, because this is a big deal. When we talk about individuals, sometimes it's very, common where someone's, hey, I need money. Can you send me money? It's just very common, especially right now. And then you look at businesses, exact same thing, right? You might be paying a bill to a vendor, and it might be for several $1,000s, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they say, hey, can you send it to a different address or a different bank, right? Or here's a different routing number for the wire transfer. All of that stuff might seem completely reasonable in this time. However, those are the exact things that the bad guys or fraudsters, whatever you want to call them, will rely on to trick people. And you can't forget that. Even before this happened, these things are very common, and we probably deal with them a few times a month where someone says, hey, this happened, we wired money, what do we do now? And many times the answer is, you got to move quick. Prevention is so much easier than trying to solve it after it's happened.
And that reminds me of something that Stephanie Barnhill said earlier this week. We were talking about tips and tech for working from home, and she said, over-communicate. Now more than ever, don't feel like you're bugging your boss or you're bugging your supervisor, especially if you get something that seems out of place, an email or a request. Ask.
Yes.
The kids are running around or the dogs are barking and you think you're firing off that last email of the day, and then something pops in. The last thing you need is to be dealing with another disaster on top of this.
Yes, you're exactly right. Everyone's distracted. I'm in my basement. I can hear my kids upstairs. It's just, that's how it is. So you're exactly right. Over communicate. And if you have any doubts about some piece of information that you receive, an email, and I hate to say this, even phone calls, there's people who they've received wire transfer requests or changes to wire transfer information or payment information, and there's been a phone number. They call the phone number, someone answers and says, yes, this is the right information. I mean, these schemes are so sophisticated. It was all a scheme to defraud, out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's okay to be careful, right? Even though where everyone's in this kind of state of anxiety, even though it's, in some cases, some businesses are on life support, they're just trying to figure out how to survive. It's okay to take an extra 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, figure something out, right? It's not something so urgent where it is actually mission critical to send an email or kind of overlook some maybe red flag that you think that, hey, this seems suspicious. Make sure you follow through on it. And I know a lot of people, this is a new message for them, right? And the way I describe it is, you don't really start to pay attention to these things until it happens to you, and then everything, you're suspicious of everything. So one of the things we try to do is just educate people on, hey, this is going to happen at some point to everybody, and then how do we teach you to respond when it does happen? And that's where, like I said, we have we've dealt with it before, and there's lots of great vendors out there that have dealt with this before, whether it's from legal, from IT perspective, even from like marketing and PR, right? You have to have good communication and have systems of communication already in place so that you can figure out, okay, how do we communicate this to whoever we need to communicate it to?
I want to actually talk about communications and messaging next. A quick reminder, anyone tuning in, thank you for your comments. Feel free, post questions if you have them for John, and I'll make sure that we ask them before we go. So thank you to Amber and Stephanie who are commenting. John, let's talk about communications a little bit, because I know you and I were talking earlier, and my team's been dealing with a lot of the messaging, the external and internal messaging from a marketing and PR standpoint. But the communications that you're dealing with are more related to kind of this crisis management and disaster planning. So can you talk about, from your aspect, about the communications?
Sure, absolutely. I think the biggest questions people need answered are that you're there and that there's some type of consistent communication on updating on what's happening. I think, even if you don't have all the information, even if you can't sit down and say, I know exactly what I'm going to do, 3 weeks from now, 1 week from now, 3 months from now, you still have a certain amount of information and you can communicate that to the relevant people, whatever it is, even if it's we're here, or here's our hours, here we're open, right? Or we're available, or we're not available, and here's why, right? Those kind of things, you can't overlook how important it is to just, number one, communicate something, right? Whatever it is just communicate something like, here's what we know, here's our stance. I think this is also a great opportunity, even though there's some emergency, side of this. It's also, you can't neglect that this is a great opportunity to earn trust and really build trust with people when they know, hey, how do you react under pressure? Many times people don't know how we react when there are kind of adverse circumstances. And this is an opportunity to show our customers, our clients, especially the people who work for us, our employees, hey, how do we react when there's, when bad stuff happens? What do you do? So I think there's this emergency kind of aspect. There's also letting people know when you're available. I think for us as a law firm, we're having conversations about, hey, people need to know that we're available to help. People need to know what kind of legal issues are out there, right? Whether it's compliance, whether it's employment law, whether it's tax law, whether it's cybersecurity, like we talked about, or contracts, or kind of corporate issues. People need to know that you're available and that you're open, and these are the kind of things that you're helping people with. So it's important, even though it's a tough time. I think what's amazing is we can do stuff like this, like, hey, we can go on Facebook, we can stream, we can get information out there, and people hopefully will, if they want to watch it. I don't know if, how people feel, but I think that there's so many great avenues to communicate. We have to make sure that even if you feel like I don't even know what to say, right, there are things you can say to give people comfort, consistent communication, and let people know, where you're at, even though we don't have all the information.
And video right now in real time, but recording video is a way to also be able to connect with people. They can see your facial reactions. They can make the eye contact. They can, like you said, building trust is so key. I saw this morning the video that Marriott Hotels put out with their CEO. And if any businesses are watching, this is a great example of what to do. It's very personal. You can see on his face, you can hear in his voice that this is something that's impacting him personally. And he talks about caring for his staff, caring for, everyone around the world, and really being united in this. So many key points that are made, but also at the same time, letting us know that hotels are in some areas are closed, and some of their staff have been affected and are sick from the virus, and things like that are not comforting to hear, not good things, news to share, but yet he's doing it in a way that's very transparent and makes it feel like you're connecting. And so, John, that's one of the things you were saying, is make sure that you're connecting, even if you don't have a lot to say, or even if things aren't looking really great right now. I think this is a good opportunity in our messaging to be united. And we're seeing a lot of that with some of the local, Lansing restaurants that have had to close or switch up their services. And obviously they're going through a tough time with servers and bartenders not being able to work and that sort of thing. So certainly being able to communicate that and talk about it and have transparency. That's one of the things I talk about with my team is I may not always like the news that I'm going to share, but I'm going to be fully transparent about it and keep you in the loop and let you know what's going on and kind of expect the same in return. And also understand that if something's pulling you away from work right now, if you need to, take time for your family or take time in whatever way that might be, just communicating that message.
Yeah, and there's some really great examples. I hadn't seen the Marriott example, but I think there's just so many really good examples right now. People are really doing a good job with the communication side of things, just being open, transparent, and I think a lot of people can learn from that. The other thing, and I don't know how much if you want to cover this, but I think once you figure out survival and, hey, I can either stay in business or, personally, I feel like I'm comfortable in terms of, okay, I can make it through today or the weekend, right, or the next couple of weeks. I think this is a great opportunity to think about how you can reinvent your business, yourself, individually, and I heard one person say it's the time to invest, not retreat, right? Once you figure out how to survive all of these um, all of these circumstances really give you, I think, some insight into the future and where it's headed. So, for example, like we talked about remote working, right? The ability to work anywhere. If your team can't work anywhere and respond and really thrive in a situation like this, I think it's a red flag that you got to figure out, okay, why is that? What's holding us from getting there? And not just like right now, like today, March 20 or whatever day it is, right? But hey, in the next few months, the next few years, what's holding us back from getting there? I think a lot of people have looked at this and we're not thinking about, hey, where do I need to really change? Like what trends, are really converging right here, and what does the future look like? Like all of the technology that we're using to communicate, all of when we look at our devices, when we look at the trends, it's all converging and it's all been here for a while. There just hasn't been a reason why people want to meet virtually, right, as much, right? And it's there and it's been around, but now there might be reasons, the next few years, the next decade, where people might prefer to have a relationship, right, over, uh, you know, through a screen rather than meeting in person, right? So how do you respond to that as a business owner? How do you respond to that as a business? How do you respond to that as an individual? And I was talking with my wife just earlier this week and basically saying, an underrated skill in the next 10 years is going to be, how do you build a relationship with someone without ever seeing them in person? And if you think about that, that's going to be a real skill to have. And in many cases, we don't think about that. But if you are looking at the trends and looking at it, it's going to, you and I are basically staring at screens right now, but we're talking, we're having a conversation. And how do you do that on a personal level? How do you do that from a business perspective? This is a trend that you can't ignore, and it's not going away. And once you figure out the survival, once you figure out, okay, continuity of your business and compliance with all these different orders that are coming out, then you can say, okay, let's take a moment where it's quiet, where I can just think about things, and how do we reinvent to respond to some of this craziness that's going on, not just respond today, but respond, going forward.
Long term, yeah. What new services are we going to see come out of this?
Yeah.
I mean, we already saw Netflix come up with the what are they calling it? The Netflix party, where you can now watch with other people, and it syncs up your Netflix. So you can have a movie night across the miles. I mean, things like that. That I think of course, that's more kind of from a fun aspect for us, but we can see businesses start to generate some of these apps that could be potential revenue makers. And even just like you said, seeing businesses switch up their services, how they offer services, what they offer. That some of the silver linings and opportunities that we're going to see come from this.
What about this too? Think about how many businesses have just their whole business model is they charge per event or per service. I mean, lawyers, that's how we typically do things. But look at some businesses have a subscription model, right? Where it's just a monthly payment, right? And I think about how Disney shifted, right, from being completely focused on their big movies and going to theaters. And, not long ago, they launched their online streaming platform to compete with the Netflixes and Hulus and all the other different streaming platforms, Disney Plus. Well, today I look at that and I think my kids are watching Disney Plus, right, because they can't go to the movie theater. It's so interesting to me that now, and I can't, don't recall how many subscribers they have to that, but any business can think that way. So how do you reinvent yourself before something like this happens in the future? And you could probably even launch something relatively soon if you're thinking about it, and depends on what the specific business is. But there are aspects to that where you can say, hey, how can I be prepared for something like this? If, hey, our doors can't open, how can we be in business in the future?
And Hulu and all of those services to keep us company. John, before we kind of start to wrap things up here, I do want to touch on even just briefly on employment and some of there have been a number of bills that have been a lot of information about different potential bills, and then we've seen some new laws go into effect. So what what are some of the most important things right now for employers dealing with employees?
So I think there's a lot. Okay, so clearly this is, I think, to me, the issue that I've heard about the most. There's certainly all these other issues we talked about have, we've had discussions about them, but the employment issues are the ones that I personally have been asked the most about. And my advice with employment is there are a lot of changes that have happened very, very quickly. There were just changes to FMLA, and there's a period of time where you have to make some decisions on what you're going to do. There are changes to unemployment, right? So this is where people need to get very specific advice about, hey, what can I do right now? And how do I take care of my employees, but also do the right thing so that the business can stay in business, so that at some point, down the line, they can, re-energize and refocus and reopen. When it comes to employees, I would say be very careful, right? There are rules that you have to follow in terms of, hey, if you're thinking, do I need to terminate some staff or some employees, right? Don't do that without talking to someone first. There are programs now that are available. There might be specific advantages to putting someone on leave versus like termination. So don't necessarily just think, oh, I got to fire everybody and then this is what, then that'll fix everything. No, that might actually make it worse. So, get specific advice. We have our Foster Swift Coronavirus Task Force webpage. If you just go to fosterswift.com, there's a big section on employment. There's frequently asked questions, and things are changing, like I mentioned. There's different relief to different people. It's not just necessarily for big businesses or small businesses, or, a lot of times, and I saw someone basically, there's lots of different federal bills out there. And I know that I believe they just passed something last night or recently, or if not recently, it will be passed soon, where they're going to, potentially be using federal funds. To me, the bottom line is look at our website. We are having all the updates there. So if people have specific questions, they can go on there, but get specific advice before you say, hey, I'm going to make some drastic employment change within an organization. Think about it, right? Also think about how does this affect the whole organization, right? In terms of, can I reopen at some point? Or there's so many different factual kind of differences that we've noticed. So it just makes sense, reach out, look at some of the documents that we've put out there, and then have a conversation and just have, say, hey, here's my situation. Here's what's going on. Here's my goal. Here's what I want to do. What's the best way to accomplish that? I think that's really the best advice that I could give when we're talking about employment, because every situation is so different. And depending on the size of the employer, depending on the type of workers that you have, right, whether they're exempt or non-exempt, you really have to talk with someone that understands those issues specifically. And I wish I could give, every situation and say, hey, here's what you should do. But it's changing all the time. So you might be hearing this, and then tomorrow it might be completely different.
And I know this morning I talked with your marketing department, and some of your attorneys have worked on several new articles that are going to be posted even before noon today. So yeah. FosterSwift.com, your website is being updated regularly. So that's a great resource for people to use as they're navigating through this. And then, of course, contacting you directly, John. What's the best way to reach you? I imagine through email?
Through email, yeah. Jmashni, JMASHNI @fosterswift.com.
John, anything else that you want to highlight before we go here today? And we do have one question. So let me just, Amber is asking, what if you are self-employed? I've heard there is some relief coming.
I think, and this is where I'm not sure what's in the federal bill that was either just passed or is about to pass, where they are talking about sending actual, checks to people. And I haven't looked at it yet, but I think that there's relief from that perspective. I'm not sure what other type of relief there would be in terms of, specifically. But goes back to my advice of look at the page that we have up. I'm sure there'll be all the updates and everything there, especially if you're self-employed, because it's really different, right? And a lot of times if you look at some of the proposals that were made, it was, if your income drops by a certain amount, right, or a certain percentage, or has dropped, But if you're self-employed, you can't really show that, right? It's not like you're getting a check and you can say, hey, my check's lower. It's like, hey, you might lose a client, right? Or you might lose a source of income. So it's really difficult to show. That's why it's hard to just say one proposal is going to help everybody. But again, check our site, and we'll definitely have updates on there.
Definitely. Check fosterswift.com. We're also working next week. We're going to have a whole lineup of more experts. And John, I know we're talking about having an employment attorney from Foster Swift join me next week. Also, the Small Business Development Center, Amber, would be a great resource as well for those who are self-employed or 1099. I know that's a whole nother issue there where, again, John, we're looking at contract workers who, go contract to contract. And right now those contracts may not be coming. So again, Amber, thanks for that question. Definitely fosterswift.com. John, anything else before we wrap up here that you want to highlight or emphasize to the audience?
I'll just say this, not specifically legal related, but just something I've been thinking about and just noticing is it's amazing the things that notice that you miss now that they're gone, right? So some sense of gratitude of just like, wow, right? If you think about being grateful, to me, it's like every job, every role is important. If you think of, things that are taken away, right? You can't go out to a restaurant, you can't go to a sporting event. Those roles are important. And there's some level of grace that people need to have when they're dealing with everybody, because everybody's really stressed out. Everybody feels this anxiety. And the other thing I would say is just being grateful for, there are so many support systems out there. There are people that are really taking action. There are people that are trying to spread what we believe is the right information and trying to help people. And we're all in it together. I think that's kind of the last thing that I think about is, hey, we're trying to figure out what's going on from our end. You're trying to figure out what's going on your side of things. We're trying to share information. We're all doing the same thing. So there is an element to me of thinking about, hey, let's be kind, right? Let's not let the situation dictate how we treat people. Let's let the right way to treat people dictate how we treat people. I think that's important to remember, being grateful for the organizations that we have that are trying really hard. This is a really difficult time for people, and you can say whatever you want about, hey, let's enforce this agreement, or let's force people to do certain things, but ultimately these are still people, and they're dealing with a stressful time just like everybody else.
Gratitude and I really like that, John. And thank you again so much for offering your insights today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you've got another task force meeting coming up this morning. So, and John Mashni from Foster Swift, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Julie. Great to chat as always. And I'm sure we'll be in touch at some point soon.
Thanks, John. Okay, and so for everyone else, later today at mConnexions, we're going to continue to connect you with trusted experts like John Mashni at 1 o'clock today. Nora Luke, she's the founder of Corporate to Calling. She's going to join us to talk about looking for opportunities, silver linings, even while all of this is going on. I think that'll be a great way to kind of wrap up our Friday afternoon. So that's at 1 o'clock today. We have a full lineup of experts who will be joining us next week. So look for that announcement coming later today. And also check out our video tab. We've had some really incredible experts join us all week long. We will have 10 videos in total on that video tab. So whether you're dealing with financial anxiety, concerns about health and wellness, or if you're looking for information on how you should be cleaning right now, all of these topics we have been talking with experts about all week long. So check out those interviews, and we'd love to have you join the conversation right here on Facebook. We'll see you back here today at 1 o'clock.